Genesis 4, Cain and Abel. The irony is not lost on me that maybe nobody will ever see this. You don't build cathedrals by telling the truth. You only get that by telling people what they want to hear. That they're good when they're not, or they're bad when they're not. Seems to be what brings in the checks. Cain and Abel. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Jeez, that escalated quickly. From first this idea that somehow Cain was less than because he was raising vegetables instead of raising meat. Like, it's more of this less than, greater than thing that came from the initial fall, and so you see that it progresses. That now that we know that there is good and evil in the world in some fashion, now we evaluate everything as being greater than or less than. But it even sort of happened before eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because Adam didn't know how to conceive of Eve as being an equal. Because God was greater than Adam, the angels were greater than Adam, the animals were less than Adam. Adam was this singular entity who was supposed to be in God's image, meaning he was created as God's friend or something like that, to have a conversation with God, to have a relationship. But how can you really have a relationship with something that's so much more than you that you feel so inferior all the time? And then you're given other things that are inferior to you in some way, in some comparative way, and then you feel like, well, so everything in the world must be either superior or inferior. So all of a sudden, judgment is applied to everything, whether that's logical or appropriate or not. There's always judgment of this thing is better than that thing. This thing is greater than that thing. This thing is less than this thing. This thing is good. This thing is evil. Even if we don't really know, we just think that because that's there, we must have to apply it to everything in our perception, and it's not really true. It's all just this huge, incomprehensible universe. But we feel so uncertain with that we can't seem to settle down and just enjoy our existence for what it is and accept it for what it is. And I kind of think that's what Cain thought. It's like, oh, well, I'm less than, so, well, shoot, now God's telling me I have to be the master, so I'm going to exercise control, and here's a way I can control and be better than so that God will see me with favor again, is by killing the thing that's less than me. Killing the thing that's greater than me so that I can rise up. That's, I think, what Cain was thinking, what the message of this is, that he's trying to kill the thing that's greater than him so that he can rise up and be closer to God, because God saw him with disfavor because his offering was less than. And probably what is actually happening here, I would guess, this is my interpretation, is that what Cain is interpreting as God is actually what his father was thinking, and his father Adam was just a jerk, telling him what God was, even though he'd separated from God by this point. So that didn't go very well. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the message is that yes, he is, and he should care for his brother. Not that, no, he should abandon his brother because he's not his brother's keeper. That's not the message here. You know? The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So I don't really know what all that means. But people do wander the earth. I mean, I feel like Cain sometimes, like I'm a restless wanderer. I have no home. I have no stability in my life, you know? I have no certainty over my existence. And it's an unhappy feeling, I was raised to believe family, 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 family. But you know what? It didn't work out that way, actually. And I just don't have access to that kind of life. Sitting here in my mom's house, helping her get ready to move to an assisted living place. And but I don't know. I mean, I have no. I've always sort of put my own needs aside and sort of messed up my own life. And I've ended up without any of that. Not that I murdered my brother. That's interesting, murdering one's brother, because if we're all children of God and Christ was the Son of God, then Christ is our brother, in a sense. And I think that this story culminates in the crucifixion of Christ as its fulfillment in terms of murdering one's brother, and seeing this play out, seeing this pattern play out again and again and again. And I think that's what Genesis really is more about than specific people. It's about patterns that have been noticed at the point of its writing in human culture, and that these patterns repeat themselves over and over and over, as if there were progenitors who started it all. And I think that that's what Genesis is attempting to illustrate, is that these patterns have a life of their own. And that's a little scary. It's a scary thing to conceive of, that we are not in control of our own minds and our own actions. At least, not all the time. I mean, I can choose to lift up my hand here, but, sometimes the mind gets crazy. And especially in separation from the eternal thought of God, we're not God. And I think that that's one thing that the knowledge of good and evil brought was the knowledge that we're not God and we really don't know. And we can't control it. And we don't fully understand what we are or where we're going or why we're here or what decisions we should make. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, people make bad decisions. And they carry on these patterns onward and onward and onward. And we don't seem to be able to stop them. And I think that the patterns are what these characters in this story are. The pattern of Cain killing his brother because he sees himself as less than and he wants to rise up to be greater than, to be accepted by God, but ends up doing the very thing that God would expel him for, thinking that that would have gotten him into a better place, but actually it puts him into a lower place. And I think that that's the pattern that's being illustrated by this story, a pattern that repeats again and again and again and again and again in humanity, having its ultimate expression in the crucifixion of Christ, but still happening today. It hasn't gone away. But what Christ gave us in the story later is a way out of that, a way to have faith that this pattern that's cycling through humanity isn't the whole story, that there's a greater world beyond the existence that we live in which these patterns will be removed. And through that knowledge, we have some sense of a way to start to let go of these patterns and stop repeating them over and over and over. And we know them, and it's obvious. It's obvious. But somehow they keep happening, and you read about them every day in the news, and we experience them every day in our lives in some form or another. Then Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Repetition of patterns. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methusael, and Methusael was the father of Lamech. So, if Cain was building a city, who was he building it for if there were only 4 people in existence? Obviously, Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel were not the only people in the world. Isn't that strange? I mean, all of a sudden we go from Cain being the son of the only human being in existence, the only human beings in existence, to Cain founding a city for all of these people who came out of nowhere. So, again, we have probably 2 different narratives that are being stitched together. But you could see it as, well, more of these patterns that are repeating themselves. They're coming from somewhere. And also, looking at it as if, hey, maybe Adam was not biologically the first human being, in terms of, standing on 2 legs and having just hair on the top of your head and some few other parts and being able to speak and conceive of oneself and having hands like this and so on, and being able to till the soil and hunt for food. And those people maybe have been here for a long, long time, even before Adam. But Adam was the first who was able to be with God. And that's something that he didn't recognize, because he didn't know any different, because that was the way he was born or created, out of this stock of humanity that was already there. And he was something different than had been before, but honestly, he was just too dumb to understand. And in this conception of God, which no one had shared before, he was lonely, so God created Eve out of his own material, out of his own self. Maybe he has some genetic thing, I don't know. I don't want to get into eugenics. But something about him, something in the line of Adam, enabled him to conceive of God in a different way than other human beings had been able to in the past. And then he sort of wasted the opportunity. And then all these patterns began of trying to get back to God but never being able to get there. Lamech married two women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who played stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wife, Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. I have no idea what that means. But here we go with characterizations of many of the important inventions of history, all in one thing. Tents and livestock. Well, that's certainly an advance. You have needle and thread. You have cloth. You have raising animals for food. You have fences. You have rope. All these important things that enable us to come out of a hunter-gatherer society and into agrarian society. You have music. That's an important thing that makes us different from most of the other animals. A lot of birds, play music in a sense, but they have sort of limitations about they're not improvising for the most part. There may be some birds that do, but not most of them. And then bronze and iron, which are these two other advances. Besides weapons, you have plows, you have shovels and all kinds of farming tools. You have equipment for horses, for oxen, lamps, all kinds of things you can make out of bronze and iron. And as for this thing, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. What the footnote says here is interesting. The Bible teaches that these inventors came from the line of Cain, although their work could be used for good. In this case, it seems to have led to greater violence. This is not later eye for an eye of the law, but is inciting violence. And this anger is spelled out as God promised 7-fold vengeance for any who tried to kill Cain. Lamech's arrogance increases the vengeance another 10 times in addition to the first 7. And the cross-reference is Matthew 18:22, where Jesus transforms vengeance into forgiveness and uses the same number for how many times one must forgive. And that's, the story of Genesis is that God was absent and now people are making up the rules as they go along and acting out of anger and spite and vengeance and reenacting these patterns that were illustrated by the first pattern of Cain killing his brother. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. So they started to realize Adam, in his older age, has this other son, and he's like, okay, well, Cain's line sort of didn't work out, and something's gone wrong there, and it's getting worse and worse. But here's Seth, and we have this hope for having, God back in our lives. And I think that one of the main illustrations of the Old Testament is violence. And a lot of these people, these crazy people, say, oh, see, there was violence in the Old Testament, that makes it okay. It makes it okay to stone adulterers or cut off thieves' hands or blah, blah, blah. No, that's not the point. The point is to illustrate that and say, look, this is drawing us further and further away from God. And one of the main themes is suffering under violence. And the weak who suffer the most being the ones who cry out for God to save them. And those people being, in a sense, the most blessed. Although at the same time cursed to have that reason to call out for God to be in their lives. To have suffering to remind us that our own thoughts don't cut it, and we need to be guided by some kind of power greater than ourselves in our own minds, lest we fall into the way of Cain and think that whatever we say is how things should be, our first thought being the thought we believe, and that violence is justified just to get what we want, and so on and so forth, and down that road. Why music is lumped in there, I'm not sure. Can stir the passions, I guess, but I really like music. Anyway, that's all for this.